Welcome to this What's New in Business Central server and database session. My name is Kenny Pontoppidan and I'm a program manager for the server and database, and with me I have Jens.
Thank you. My name is Jens Møller Petersen. I'm the engineering manager in the team.
And we spend most of our daily lives in this area of the server. And today we have a very boring agenda for you. It's basically just the release notes for the server features: data over data stack, web services, AL runtime, reporting, security, and go-dos. So you could actually just pause the video and go read. For that to be a more fun session, hopefully, we want to talk about the features, but maybe discuss it a bit between us.
Add a few comments on why this is important and why we've decided to build it like this.
Yeah. So don't be afraid if we interrupt. That's part of the session. So let's dive into the first topic, which is the data stack. And I believe you start here, Jens.
Yes. So what we've been focusing on in the data stack for this release is to reduce the problems we have with locking, where one user is doing something and at the same time the other users cannot do that. And we want to give more control to the AL developer. First thing we have introduced is that you can set the database isolation level from AL on a given record, where you can select one of multiple levels. And this is just the rec.ready isolation, and you set it. Now, to understand why this is important, I want to touch a little upon what the default is, which is what we've had so far, which is that we are reading without locks. We're actually reading uncommitted when writes have not been done to the table in the current transaction, or if you haven't even started a write transaction yet. Now, when data has been written to the table and you're in a write transaction, then all subsequent reads will implicitly be read with an update lock, meaning that you can inadvertently lock a lot of records. If you want to dig into the details of this, I refer you to the blog post below, where there is a description of how the product actually does the locking. But in general, you can say that the locking that we have is very pessimistic, that we're playing it very, very safe. But now you can start opting out of that behavior by setting it on the record. So let's take a look at some of the examples.
But actually, before we do that,
yes?
Can I just say something?
Oh,
we
yeah,
promised
that
we would have dialogue here. So the default here is actually also something that will become important. We are going to change that default from the current read uncommitted to read committed. And all what you've seen with the different isolations levels that you can set is actually just us being super cautious. We didn't want to change the default, which is going to happen, unless we give you a choice to change to something that you wanted to do. So,
yeah, and actually very often when you describe the locking mechanism we have, it comes as a surprise to most that they did not know that this was actually how strict or how conservative it was. So let's take an example here. So this is use case 1, where you want to find the last entry. Now, if you do that and then update it, then suddenly every future read would be with update lock. But here, instead, the GL entry record is set to read isolation update lock, which means it'll take the update lock like before. But now the rest of the transaction will not take further locks. Another example, and this is actually a heightening of the isolation level that you decide yourself that you want to heighten the isolation level. Now, the other example is that when you're inside a write transaction and you want to read something and you don't want that to lock, then you can specify isolation level read uncommitted, and then you will read, for instance, the count without taking any locks, so that you now opt out of taking a lot of extra locks. You might have noticed that there is a new one which is called read committed. Now, this is actually what we expect to be the new default, is that within write transactions, you will always want to run with read committed by default. So now you can start doing that on the individual record instance variables here. And there is an example here where you decide that you actually just want to do the read committed, and then even though the current session is in write mode on GL entry, then this one will not take any logs, but it will only read committed data. Of course, you will read the data that you have changed. So read committed means that you are reading things, so you're never reading things that other transactions, which is not yours, have modified until they're committed.
Yep.
And we really hope that investing in this will allow us to give much more concurrency in the product. But it is not something that happens overnight, because we will have to update our code to use the new isolation level, etc. And so will you.
Right. So enough locking for now. We have a few performance improvements in the data stack. We always do these. We had some partners talk about the data transfer feature we introduced in the last release. That's great. In that version, it only works in update code units. And what we found out, and partners found out, it would be very valuable if you could do this set-based operation also when you do things in install code units. So we added that in this release, so now this is possible. Now remember, data transfer works set-based, and the way we can do that is that we are not raising any AL events. So make sure that you understand how the feature works. Another example of a performance improvement we did is that whenever we have blobs internally in the server, we always need to calculate the length of the blob. And this is where, if you look at the SQL statements that we generate, we have this data length function in the select statements. Now, if you have a table extension with blobs, and these are not referenced in the earlier versions of Business Central, we would generate a SQL statement that looks like this, where we calculate the data length of the blob field in the table extensions, even if we are actually not needing that. Of course, that's stupid, right? We shouldn't do that. So what we have done in version 22 is simply remove that, and now we can skip the joins to table extensions if we are not referring to the blob fields there. Since the last release, the SQL Server team decided it was time for a new on-premises version of SQL Server 2022. So this is supported in Business Central. And as of a few releases back, we actually started to not certify or support given editions or versions. We just support what is called the database compatibility mode, which is new for SQL Server 2022. And that's how we support it. So whether you want to run SQL Server on Linux, in containers, on Hyper-V, on Azure, however you want, we're fine, as long as you keep this compatibility level.
But also remember, if you're switching to SQL Server 2022, you want to change the compatibility level on your database to make sure that you get the latest query optimizer rules, etc., because otherwise it'll do its best to behave like the previous versions of SQL Server.
Yes. So a few things that you will probably experience with SQL Server 2022 is better query optimization, so faster queries. And once we ship the version of Business Central Server that has this new read committed logging behavior, we actually expect, but we haven't tested yet, that SQL Server performance on logging will also be much better because they have introduced optimizations in SQL Server 2022 on logs. The final thing we have for databases is that we have 2 deprecation notices. Notice that these are coming in 2024 release wave 1, so you have a year from now. The first one is that we are removing server settings where you can set database hints for how to join So force order and loop join, these are going away, and therefore it will no longer be respected. How does it work if you try to set it? Will the server just say you can't, or will it just be ignored?
So server settings, when we remove the server setting, you can have server settings that the server doesn't know about, and they are just ignored.
It will be ignored. Okay, so your scripts will still work, but we are just ignoring what you want. Sorry about that. The second part is that we are going to remove internally what we call single tenancy mode. And the most important thing, or the only difference between single tenancy and multi-tenancy mode for on-premises, is that in single tenancy mode, you can write to the application database tables from AL. So we are going to remove that. We are unlikely going to remove all the PowerShell commandlets and so on that you use if you have single tenancy. So you can probably still do that from version 2024, but we need this for be able to optimize the server. So we're removing this.
Yeah, basically we want to treat the single tenancy mode as a multi-tenant setup with only one tenant, where the app database and the tenant database just happen to point to the same database in the end, but they have exactly the same behavior.
And it's not really that dangerous if you have followed the server and the database closely over the years. We are removing more and more things from the application database anyway. So this is maybe not really a problem going forward. All right. For the web services stack, we have a few things that we added here. The first is we did a lot of optimizations. Now, these are super boring to have on a slice, and we're not going to present the nitty-gritty details. But we did improve internally in the server so that the short OData calls, you will actually see, if you will see a performance gain up to 10%. We are cutting 4 milliseconds per call. So I mean, if you have short calls that take 10, 15, 20 seconds, that will actually give you better throughput. And we also we also removed up to 36% of the startup time for an OData call. And 36% of what? Well, that probably gives you these 4 milliseconds. Another thing we did that is likely to be mostly something you see for API and web service calls is that we trimmed the code in the server that is run when we start up a new session to actually get 15% faster session startup time. That is equates to 7 milliseconds. Now, if you are an interactive session and log in as a user, you won't notice 7 milliseconds. But this is for any web service call, but it's actually also for everything when you run the task scheduler, page background tasks. Any session will benefit from this. So it might be that you would see, even for if you have UI with a lot of page background tasks, you might even see a little bit faster runtime there. And then for APIs, we're also changing something here. It's not that we are removing anything, but we are changing the default for custom APIs. We have something that's called schema version that gives you better capabilities in the OData stack, and it also changed behavior, and therefore we want you to move to the latest, which is 2.0. In case you need the semantics for schema version 1, now is the time to actually put this into your web service clients so that you're not broken by this. So in a year from now, every custom API will be called by default with schema version 2. All right, what's happening in the AL runtime? This is the core of the server. A few things here, maybe nitty-gritty as well, about stability of background processes. So as of until now, you would actually be able to start a task schedule or schedule a task that could run for more than 24 hours.
Yeah, if you didn't time out anything on the database, etc. But yes, this could happen, and we've definitely seen this happening in production.
Yeah. So we just wanted to make sure that this is should not be able to take down a system by running. It's likely that a scheduled task that run for more than 24 hours is an error.
That's the common case.
Yeah.
It's just rogue code that never stopped.
So what we will do is, default is 24 hours. You have a server setting for that. We set that for 24 hours in the online version. You can set it on premises. We would even put telemetry out if we are changing your default because you have set it to a too high value.
And you even have a slide saying that now.
Yeah. That was new to me. So we send data to telemetry if this happens. A more visual thing that we added in the Ale runtime, also in what we call the error experience. I mean, it's not a great experience to get an error, but let's make sure that users get a good experience even in case errors occur. So we did two things here. First of all, we removed complexity from the error dialog, show you that, and then we're introducing what we call actionable errors. So for the first thing, this is similar if you have other products like Power BI. We don't have a lot of complexity in case you want the details. You just now have this copy details if you need to provide or look into what's happening. So this means that the error dialog slims down to something where the user does not need to kind of worry about, do I need to report this? Do I need not to report it? What's going on? So that's why we slimmed this down. There's also something to this. I don't know if you've noticed that, Jens, about these collectible errors. Have you heard about that?
I know about what the collectible errors mean, where you can have multiple errors and then they get reported as one, and then you have the subset, meaning that you can get all the errors from posting. But,
So something I noticed that this change will actually affect a bit. The idea with collectible errors was that you actually need as a programmer to handle it. And then if you don't handle it, the only way we can show all the collected errors is in the detailed error message. Now this one does not have a UI anymore, right? So what should people do? They should deal with the collectible errors, right? Make sure that you don't get to this final state. So if you think your code is showing the collectible errors in the details, that's going to be a problem for users. They're not going to see it anymore until they do this copy details.
Yeah, and honestly, having just one dialog displaying 8 errors did not really help users. Rather, you should have a dedicated UI for showing the errors that were collected so that the user can tick them off one by one, etc., like we have done with some of the preview posting and other things.
Exactly. Now, actionable errors. This is actually a shame that I'm presenting this because this is Jens's pet project or brainchild. But what we have done here on error info, and if you have followed errors closely over the last years, error info is kind of the new kid on the block.
Yes.
This is where we put the new stuff.
Yes, so in general, if you're raising errors, you might just as well get used to instantiating an error info object and then use that to raise your error rather than just putting in a text, because it'll give you a lot more capabilities like collectible errors and now also these new capabilities.
Yeah, and the beauty of this is that we can enhance the error info data type over the years without breaking your existing code. Right, so this is a nice way of that contract. So new properties on error info are these. I'm not going to read them. I'm actually going to show you what they do.
And basically, the idea here is that your code should actually take care of the error situation and help the user. So what should the user do now that this error occurs, instead of just telling the user that this particular thing went wrong.
Yeah.
Give them a step forward. But
Exactly.
it does require coding. Because we cannot automatically deduct necessarily what a user would want to do. So you need to code against the error info object.
I think we made it a lot easier with this
definitely.
release. So the first thing you notice is that you can now have a title up here as well as a text. So that title is the first thing you can set on the error info. The second thing you notice on this screenshot is that there is something else than the OK button, which is what we call an action. So how do you produce these actions as a developer? I have a few examples of that. The first one here is an error info, what we could call this a simple example, where the error is you cannot do this on a closed document. So you need to reopen the document. So how do you get an action like that? Well, it's quite simple. This is the title. What you do is you have this new concept of an add action, where you say the title of the action, what kind of code should we run. This is the code unit, and this is the method in that code unit that should be run. And then for this procedure or code to get some context of where things occurred, you can put in info into the error info object, such as system ID. So in this case, the procedure that handles the action or does the action can read the system ID from that context over here, and then handle whatever it is. In this case, reopen the document. The system ID is then for the document. The second example, a more complex one, has two buttons. One is a navigation, another is an action. And here you can see you can put more context into the error info, not only the system ID, but actually what we call custom dimensions, similar to what we have in telemetry. When you log things to telemetry, you have this text-to-text dictionary. This is the same thing. You can put in whatever you would like here. I put in a key called location and a location code as the value. And then whenever you read this from that action, you can see up here in the code, in the action code, you can then get data from this custom dimensions dictionary and then cater or make your action code whatever that was put into that. There's another one here that is called a navigation action, and this is if you set the page number property on the error info, you can add a navigation action, and that simply gives you a way to navigate somewhere to do something. Let's say this action is. Yeah, do you have a good example for that, Jens?
No, but in general, usually errors refer to a given data element. So now you have the ability to open this page on this data element, because that's usually where you would need to fix things. You have not set up an inventory posting group. Well, then open up the page where I can set the inventory posting group. That kind of navigation.
So hopefully this will make your code in your apps and pertaining extensions just much easier, as Jens mentioned this. Instead of just saying, you can't do this because blah, now you would get, you can't do that because blah, would you like to go here and fix it?
And it's going to take a while for us to go through our application and add the necessary navigation actions so far. So we have the building blocks and it is being used in some places, but it will take a while to write up the code for really nice error handling for the users.
Yep. And now over to you, Jens, to talk about some more performance-related things.
A minor thing is on the in-stream, where before you had to copy it into a blob to get length and position. So we now have new properties on the in-stream to get the position, and you can reset it and you can get the length. And before you would have to create a temporary blob and an outstream, etc., and do code. now you just need to call the document stream.length in this example and assign that into an integer. And this is a request that we've had from partners just to remove some boilerplate code.
And there are, I think, actually two good things to this. One is the slow is slow.
Yes.
The bad thing about the slow is also it consumes memory.
Oh yeah, and also it's just harder to read.
Yeah, that's true. So Jens, why do we care about memory in the online version?
So memory in the online version is very much lowering how efficiently we can run the VMs, etc., and how much we can have cached, etc. So in general, when we can reduce the memory footprint, we can actually run faster.
Yeah, but isn't there also something with garbage collecting memory that can infer?
Yes, so you might have seen a couple of versions back where the server would occasionally freeze because it was doing garbage collection. Of course, when we use less memory, that will happen less frequently. We fixed the majority of those issues, but everything we can do that reduces garbage collection, memory, etc., just gives you a more responsive system.
Yeah.
Now, we've also looked at the list to cart navigation, where particularly if you were using list search where basically indexing is turned off, it would be slow because when navigating from the list to the cart, we would be issuing the same queries again to populate the forward and backward looking. Now we've changed that so that we do a get on the current record, and then we reissue the queries when needed, when you actually navigate away from it, because our telemetry shows that the vast majority of usages of this is just to open the card, do your stuff, and close it again. So you should see significantly faster navigation to cards from list with this change. Now, along with some of the performance improvements, we're also adding to telemetry so that you can actually see where time is spent. We've added request queue time for incoming web service calls, and also added the number of SQL rows read and how often we call SQL to the long-running AL methods. So you stand a better chance if you, as you of course have done, you have set up telemetry, you can now troubleshoot performance issues much better and actually see why the system is behaving as it does.
And these are examples of what we call all the little things. All these are feedback from you, where you said, this is great in telemetry, but if I could only do this, I could troubleshoot also this. And we listen, of course we listen to that because we want you to be data-driven. So if you have feedback like that, let us know and make sure that we add all these little things that will make telemetry a lovable feature and something that you say, this is simply working the way we expect it to be.
Yes, and now we come to one of the things that we've actually spent the most time on over the last year or two, which is moving the server to .NET Core, or now more specifically to .NET 6. We have talked about this before. We've mentioned it in previous What's New because you needed to be aware of it, but now with version 22 we are switching over. And what the new .NET runtime gives us is a faster runtime, we use less memory, and also everything that gets added to the .NET runtime we can make use of now, so that we can keep building a more and more efficient server. Now, if you in on-premise are using .NET add-ins and they are targeting .NET Framework, they will no longer work in version 22. This should not come as a surprise. I think we mentioned it the last 5 recordings of this. Now, since we've also moved to .NET 6, before we said you should hopefully rewrite your .NET add-ins to use an external service, but if you needed the .NET add-in, then you could target .NET Standard. .NET Standard allows to be run both on the old .NET Framework and the new .NET 6. Now that we have switched over to .NET 6, you no longer need to be able to run on .NET Framework, meaning that you can now target .NET 6 instead of .NET Standard if you still need your .NET add-ins.
Yeah. And did we do this move to .NET Standard and 6 just because it was fun? Or like, why not stick just with .NET Framework?
Well, first of all, there are a lot of performance improvements in the later versions of .NET 6, .NET 7, etc. All new capabilities will get added there, not to the .NET Framework. So it's always a question, when should we make the jump? Because it has been a big investment, but when is the old framework getting too old? And we thought that now is the time. Yeah. And fortunately, we are seeing some very strong performance improvements, etc. And we're now back on the main technology track.
So you also mentioned, Jens, about performance, that it's up to 30% faster on AL execution. But does it, I mean, if you write AL, you have things that compute, but you also go to the database or to external systems. So where do you actually get that gain?
So you mainly get that for the AL heavy operations. It's very seldom that you have AL only. It is mainly in algorithms that are implemented in AL, because normally it's a mix of AL and data access, etc. So very often you're more bound by concepts like locking, by indexing on SQL, etc. But of course, for the AL heavy routines, this will make a difference, and it'll just make everything a little bit faster. I think it'll be seldom that you'll see a 30% improvement, but in our internal test cases that we run, it was about 10-15% for a lot of normal scenarios like creating purchase order and other things. So it was a noticeable difference.
Very nice. Next topic is reporting.
Everybody's favorite topic.
Everybody's favorite topic. I hope
maybe
actually,
this year. Maybe this year.
Maybe this year you're gonna love reporting. Before we jump to the hyped feature, we have something also important, which is called what we call report localization support. The problem is as follows. You might have users who set their region in the client, and suddenly the reports they run have the wrong decimal separators, the wrong date formats, and so on. And we had multiple requests from partners to fix this. So we actually did fix it a year ago, and then one class of partners were very happy, now it's fixed. And then we got bug support requests from another part of the partner community who said, you broke our reports. And no matter what we do, this or this, if we decide we're going to make some of you unhappy, so we decided to maybe make that so that you're all happy. You can now specify in report metadata the format region of this report. You can override that on the tenant level, and the user can even override it on the requests page. So this is how it looks in report metadata. You can simply set on the curve report the format region, and in this case, this could be DADK, but it could be something else. If the tenant admin is unhappy about that, she can simply go in and change this and say, for this particular report, I want the region to be not Danish, but something else. And then the user on the request page under advanced setting here, she can now go and set the report region or language. And what this means for all of these, depending, is if the report used to be English culture, of course, we are from Denmark, we want to use the Danish culture. So the overriding of whatever it was to a new culture here is in this example showing the decimal in the way a Dane would want it.
Yeah, so the format controls how dates decibels, etc. are shown, whereas the language should be what language are captions and other things presented in.
Yeah. And then...
and it also means that now I can run my report with the Slovakian language, the Spanish formatting, etc.
Yeah.
I'm looking very much forward to that. You can mix and match however you like.
There's a very, very small use case of that. Probably he's standing over here. All right. Very hyped new feature that we are very excited to go to public preview is, it has many names. Maybe that's part of being in public preview. I like to call it analyze data. Maybe we call it data analysis. Some people call it analysis mode. Does it matter? No. What matters is that we are now giving end users the capability to completely slice and dice, group, pivot their data on directly in the client. No need to go to Excel, no need to go to Power BI. For these mini reports or analysis, you just enable analyze on a list and you define your analysis here. You have an example here of customer order summary, where you even have pivoted row columns up here. You're grouping on different dimensions here, and then you're summing or counting some numbers.
But there's a full session on that, right?
There's a full session on that. Now, we wanted to show this because our team, the server team, is part of this. It just doesn't happen in any team. I think what we also want to is maybe tease a little bit about what we are doing under the hood that will come in later releases. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Jens?
Well, so with the analysis feature, the basic grouping, etc., is happening client side, and there is a limit to how much data we can handle. So we want to be able to handle basically any amount of data by allowing SQL Server to do the heavy lifting of grouping, etc., when you have large data amounts. So we'll definitely be investing in moving this to also work with very large data sets. Now, that actually will have a side effect on what you can do with query objects, because if we need it here, we might just as well expose it to the query object. So you should probably also see that evolving a little over time.
So bookmark that and then come back to us in 6 to 12 months and see if something's cooking here. I hope definitely to see this coming in the AL interface as well.
Oh yes, there'll be lots of things happening.
Yeah, so stay tuned for that. We're not done. Let's move into security.
Yes, my other favorite topic, permissions.
Yay!
Yay! You know, most likely that we have done a lot with allowing you to compose permission sets inside others, excluding permissions, etc. Now, of course, when you get something, you always want more. And one of the things that we have found a need for is basically to opt completely out of the permission system, so that you can ensure that all users always have permission for this object. We've done that by introducing what's called inherent permissions on objects. It works basically like the inherent permissions for a method attribute, except that this works whenever this object is used, the user has this permission. So, for instance, you can always write to the changelog table because all users have indirect access to the changelog table. And in this case, you can see you specify it in inherent permissions property, where you can set it to RIMDX. We have, for simplicity, decided to collapse table and table data so that you can specify it using one property. So in this example here, all users will have indirect access to everything on this table. This allows us to simplify our permission sets further because there are some things that we don't really want to be able to control. Yes, so in version 21, we added the ability to exclude from permission sets. Unfortunately, Microsoft, we ship a number of permission sets that have wildcard permissions. That means permissions to all pages or all code units. And the first thing partners would try would be to exclude, for instance, page 5000, so that Kenny cannot see that, from one of our permission sets, and that did not work in version 21. And since this seemed like a very central scenario, we have invested in getting this to work, and we shipped this in version 21.3. So this means that now, even if a permission set includes wildcard permissions, then you can now do exclusions of individual objects. And we have invested in making this performant so that even though you have R and I and M, then you can just exclude the insert, and then you still have the wildcard R and M, etc. And it now seems to work exactly as partners and customers expect it to work.
Yeah. Can I say something here
Absolutely.
about this? So when you hear about Jens and I talking about permission, slide, functionality, and so on, it's all like Lego block. It's all the building blocks that we are providing. And why are we doing that? Well, we have a sister team in the application who is working on making the permission sets, the permissions in Business Central, much easier to understand. And they have been one of the main customers for us, right? So for them to do this, they needed these building blocks. This is why you see Jens and I talking about Lego blocks. And when you see the permissions sessions coming up, you will hear other people talk about the actual new permission sets that were defined to make things easier.
Yes. Now, another improvement we have made is the ability to control your security setup using AAD groups. So you can manage permissions by assigning users to groups and then assigning group memberships to permission sets. That has come. We have made improvements to the service-to-service authentication so that they can now run scheduled tasks. This has been shipped already. And then, by popular request, we have added the ability for delegated admins to create job queue entries for licensed users so that your delegated admin can actually maintain the job queue functionality for you. The changes to permissions, etc. We had the change log, which would tell when Kenny made changes to a permission set, etc. But it was actually lacking a little in changes that were done by uploading new versions of applications or extensions. Now we have added to the telemetry that gets added there. In particular, if you were extending a permission set, because I can actually extend another permission set, changing what this permission set actually means, now that also gets logged to telemetry, giving you the chance to actually see if changes have been made. This is also reflected in the Power BI report, where there is a new page on the permission changes, where you can see the statistics and what apps did it, etc. So as always, strongly recommend set up telemetry for your environments and make use of the data. And it also allows you to set up alerts so that if there are changes, you can get an email, it can notice you in Teams, etc. There are tons of good examples at aka.ms/bc telemetry samples. And there are also examples of how you'll set up these types of alerts.
So if you're still with us, we're done.
Yeah.
This is the last slide, and we just have a few recommendations for you to go do once you're done with the virtual launch event sessions. So the first thing is go back to your upgrade or install code and see whether you can make use of the data transfer feature to make it faster. This is important for your customers. Now you can go into your telemetry as an ISV and actually see whether your installs take a long time or if your upgrades take a long time. And if you improve that, you'll make your customers happier. The second thing is move your .NET add-ins to .NET 6 for on-premises. Because if not, you won't be able to upgrade. So make sure that you follow our documentation there and see if you can either change to .NET 6, or you might need to simply change to run things in a service. We did that for our own app functionality, where we could migrate most of the .NET add-ins, but we actually had two where there was no .NET standard version of the .NET thing. So we needed to move those to Azure Functions.
Yes, and actually if you're running these on-premise, you will see that there is a new site service that runs these under the .NET framework, but this is only in certain local functionality, so most of you actually will never see that. But
the Mexican version and the Netherlands,
yes,
and the Dutch one.
Yes, exactly. Also recommend to start using the read isolation to reduce database locks to give better concurrency in your system. And then repeat what we've said before. Redesign your app permissions, stop copying them around. You can now do the exclude instead. Use the new permissions features to create understandable building blocks that your customers can use. And with that, we're done.
Thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully you will join all the other great sessions here at the virtual launch event. And thank you.
Thank you.